Today I'm going to show you how to make some heart motif socks for ladies. We'll demonstrate using a size 6. To make these, I am using a punch card that I designed. I shared the punch card with you in its own video. I'll put links to the card video and the other projects using the card in the program notes. These written patterns mostly appear in my newest book, Single Bed Socks. All of these patterns make socks using one bed only, no ribber necessary. The original book only covered standard gauge, but this bulky pattern in ladies sizes 5 to 11 has now been added to the book. There will also be a link to the page where you can buy the book in case you want written patterns. I'm using red heart yarn in 2 different colors, stitch size 5, getting 4 stitches 6 rows per inch. Start off by inserting the heart card upside down into the feeder. Set the carriage so that it will select, but don't use any yarn, and knit back and forth until you see the first patterning row. It should look like this. Lock the card here. E-wrap 32 needles, thread the main yarn, I'm using gray for the main color, into the carriage, and knit 11 rows. Stop on the left. If using a brother, when you stop on the left, turn the dial to KC and the 12th row will select. If using a Singer Studio Silver Reed, you really don't have to do anything. You can just knit 12 rows. Place a bar weight or claw weights on the fabric as soon as possible. You know your machine best. Put however much it takes to make it behave itself. So we're knitting the 12 stockinette rows. This is the inside of the hem and the first 2 rows of the outside of the hem. When we've knitted the 12th row and the needles are selected, set the card so it will now advance. Add the color of yarn that you plan to use for the hearts to feeder 2, and be sure to select Fair Isle settings. Knit in Fair Isle for 6 rows. That's how many rows the heart takes up. We're all done with the Fair Isle for this project now, so you can remove color 2, roll the card back 6 rows and lock it again so you'll be ready for sock number 2, and return the carriage to stockinette settings. Knit 2 more plain rows in the main color, then stop with the carriage on the right, remove any weights, and lift the E-wraps to close the hem. Now we're going to knit down to the heel. I suggest 24 rows, but you may alter that number slightly if you want to. Set the carriage to hold the needles that come all the way forward, and put the half of the needles on the side away from the carriage into hold. That's 16 needles in this size. We are now going to do some short rowing for the heel, and we'll do it again for the toe. And the trick to successful short rowing on most machines is enough weight correctly placed. You may use claw weights or heel grips that you've purchased. My personal favorite is the heavy forks that I show you how to make in Cheap Tricks and Cool Tools. Knit across on half of the needles with your weight placed on the center of the ones that are knitting. Put the last needle that knitted in the hold. Knit across, put the last needle in hold. Keep on doing that until either 4 or 6 needles remain in work. And let me explain how you figure that out. I know my feet, so I'm going to keep on going until 4 are still in work. Ideally, we would knit until 1/3 of the needles remained in work, but since there are 16, 1/3 would be 5.33 needles, and we can't do that, of course. So we need to decide between a little bit narrower heel and a little bit wider heel. Relative to the rest of my foot, my heels are on the narrow side, and I find that going down more than 1/3, if I have to choose, is better. But if you had the opposite situation, which is also very common, you might choose to short row in until there were 6 rows. The difference does change the length of the sock because some of the heel contributes to the length down the foot. So I'll tell you how to adjust for that as we knit the foot length. As we short row, success depends on keeping the stitches pulled down that are still knitting. A pouch of fabric is forming. We want that. That's because we need room for our heels and toes. But it's a challenge for the machine. So move your heavy fork or whatever you're using frequently so as to make sure that it is effectively pulling down the stitches, down out of the way so they don't catch on anything, and also down so that they don't want to jump off the needles. Short rowing in is the process whereby the rows get shorter. Now we are short rowing out on the side away from the carriage, returning one needle to work every row. You see that I almost lost a stitch there from waiting a little too long to lose my weight. I managed to save it, but let that be a lesson to you. It's a false economy of time not to move the weights frequently. Take the time to do it and you'll never have any problems with short rowing. When the last needle near the center of the work is returned to work, wrap the working yarn around the next needle over that's still in hold. Return the final needle to work, and now set the carriage to knit back from hold. We're going to knit down the length of the foot. These are a size 6, and I'm going to knit 30 rows. If I had not short rowed the heel into 4 and only gone to 6, I would need 32 rows. When you finish up the rows for the foot length, return to the settings at which you knitted the heel and repeat the heel for the toe. It's the same exact thing. I know they don't really look like they're the same shape, but they are. Remember to use weights while short rowing and repeat the process. For the toe, you do have the choice of going into either 4 or 6 stitches. I really suggest that almost everybody will want 4. If you decide you want a blunter toe, knit 2 extra rows down the length. Because again, part of the toe contributes to the length down the foot. You've caught me in the act. I am attempting to knit with one hand and film with the other so as to get you really up close to the action, and it has its drawbacks. As before, be careful about moving the weight frequently. We finished short rowing in, now we're short rowing out. When the short rowing out is complete, change to waste yarn and scrap off. A good 2 inches of waste yarn is helpful, I think. Scrapping off is so that we can Kitchener stitch or graft the toe. If you would prefer a seamed toe, you may go ahead and bind off now and skip the waste yarn. To finish the sock, these 2 edges will be sewn together, so there will be a seam. Most people would prefer that seam go up the inside of the ankle. Therefore, for your second sock, it's best to start with the carriage on the left so that your heel and toe will end up on the left. That way, the socks will be mirror images and both seams can go down the inside of the ankle. Be sure to pull the hem lengthwise with a really firm tug. A hung hem never looks its absolute best until you do that, and the hearts are very much affected by either doing it or forgetting to do it. You'll see quite a looks difference. Use the initial yarn tail and a yarn needle to whip stitch the inner layer of the hem together. Then come around to the outside, the right side of the sock, and start seaming. On machine knitted items, alternate rows have tight little knot-like things at the end of the row, alternating with the next row having a longer, looser stitch. For these socks, I stitched through the knots rather than the bars. It gave me good contact. It was not difficult to find the knots because of the bulky gauge. And I found that pushing the needle up from the bottom gave the best looking seam. If you're seaming the toes, just seam them. If you're grafting them, tuck the waste yarn to the inside and then do the grafting. I do have whole movies on this and I'll put a link in the program notes. But basically, grafting is creating an imaginary row of knit stitches with the way you manipulate your yarn needle. The trick to a good-looking graft is perfect tension in your hand, and it just takes practice. At this point, the waste yarn is still inside. You can see it peeking through, and the graft will look better still after it's been removed. Turn the sock inside out, snip the first row of waste yarn in a few places, and each of the little pieces created by those snips will pull right out without any problem. These socks probably won't fit in any shoes you own except possibly work boots, but they're wonderful for lounging and sleeping.